Hello and welcome. This is Dirty Saxophone bringing you another video about Silksong. Today we're going to be addressing the Silksong reception. I don't know if some of you may feel the same way as I do. I've been noticing that Silksong is not as well received, kind of, as Elden Ring. And that's probably understandable, right? Because Elden Ring is massive. It's a 3D game as well, which is a more popular genre than a 2D game. It's probably going to be easier to bring in more fans to a 3D experience than it is to a 2D. I could overall just not be correct about this, but it's just what my experience has been, right, in that regard. And I'd also like to mention before we get started that because some of my opinions are based on what I've heard from reviewers and streamers and the like, their general approach towards Silksong. But I'd also like to mention that just because a streamer or a reviewer mentions that there's one or two things that they didn't like about the game doesn't mean that they don't like it in its entirety. That's a very important concept. It's good not to be that way because then it fosters speculation, creates conversation, makes this whole gaming industry a lot more fun to engage in overall. Anyway, let's get into it. Like I've said before, I'm a new content creator. I still have a lot to work with, so bear with me as I get good. So let's time travel all the way back to 2022. I say all the way as if it's been a long time. It's only been about 3 years. So in 2022, for those of you who follow the gaming industry, Elden Ring dropped. Elden Ring dropped and it changed the gaming industry pretty much forever. There are a bunch of games out there now, thanks to Elden Ring calling themselves Souls-likes. Developers are just clamoring for it. If your game has a stamina gauge, if you have to collect your belongings after your character dies, etc., you are now a Souls-like. I'm exaggerating, honestly, but yeah, just to make it clear, Elden Ring changed a lot. And personally, I think for the good. There are some people out there who don't believe that difficulty is everything for a game. For me, it is. Not everything, but it is a vast majority. A good experience at this point. But then again, I've kind of been converted because prior to getting into Monster Hunter World in 2018, I was very much so into RPGs like Fallout and Mass Effect, both of which were not anywhere near as difficult as Elden Ring or Monster Hunter World, or Silksong for that matter. In doing so, Elden Ring maintained the interest of old players. The game was very difficult. In fact, I would like to point out, interestingly enough, that Elden Ring was deemed to be too difficult by some old players. The reason being, I guess the best example to point out is Melania's waterfowl dance. So Melania's waterfowl dance was, well, very difficult to figure out how to dodge. Some people called it unintuitive, which makes sense. I can understand that because it took me a really long time to figure that out too. And yeah, I get it. In comparison to a few other difficulty mechanics in the game, it's definitely crazy. So it was very clear that Elden Ring or FromSoft definitely made it a point to make it more difficult to figure out so that old fans of the genre would experience some friction. I think they even came out and actually mentioned it as one of the reasons why they made the game so difficult. That being said, aside from retaining the interest and challenging their veteran players, whether some of those veteran players accept this form of difficulty manufacturing or not, they also brought in a bunch of new players. This is as evidenced by Kai Cenat. For those of you who don't know, Kai Cenat is a streamer, a streaming personality. I did a little bit of light history digging, and it turns out that he gained popularity outside of gaming. He didn't start as a game streamer, but at some point in time he decided that he was going to go ahead and entertain his fans by putting himself through the struggle of Elden Ring. I didn't even know who Kai Cenat was until the YouTube algorithm decided to recommend some of his videos to me. And I had a ton of fun watching it. I love watching other people suffer just as much as I do. Big ups to Kai Cenat, by the way, because not only did he finish Elden Ring just in general, he did it without magic and summons. Now, I'm not saying that's the only right way to play Elden Ring. I'm just saying he played an extra hard mode. Anyway, so a mix of reaching unfounded heights of popularity together with retaining its veteran fans, Elden Ring established the standards for difficulty in the gaming industry. When it became that popular, when it continued to engage its previous fans. And when it went mainstream the way it did, it became quite possibly the first truly difficult game experience for a lot of young players in the gaming industry right now. Personally, I think that Monster Hunter World had some really difficult challenges in it as well, but I don't think even that game did go mainstream. I'm gonna guess it was probably a mixture of those two and some other things going on, but I would say that Elden Ring was... I'd have to go do some history digging, but it would seem like Elden Ring is definitely more popular than Monster Hunter World. But I would say Elden Ring is largely responsible for setting the difficulty standards in the gaming industry. And what I mean by that is that those of us who played Elden Ring for the first time, it was my first FromSoft experience to a degree. My first FromSoft experience, though, was actually a game called Evergrace. I wouldn't call that prime FromSoft, though. That game had a lot of work that needed to be done. But Elden Ring was definitely a full FromSoft experience, and that was my personal first FromSoft experience. For a lot of other players, it was also their first FromSoft experience, probably their first experience with games that had very punishing difficulty mechanics in them at all whatsoever. And when stuff like that happens, it just kind of shapes your standards going forward, you know what I mean? Like if you learned how to use your iframes in Elden Ring, it becomes intuitive or instinctual, right? You start rolling through things or you probably find it easier to roll through things in other games, or you might find it easier to parry, like for example going from Elden Ring to Sekiro, or from Elden Ring to Monster Hunter, using your iframes to roll through attacks and etc. And the fact that Elden Ring had, well, those enemies that it has with the attacks that they have, you know, they have long distance projectiles that move a certain speed. The enemies there obviously have to have telegraphs for their attacks. Some of them will attack you when you're taking a flask and etc. When that is your first experience with difficulty, these very complex difficulty standards that FromSoft employed in order to create the difficulty in Elden Ring become your general expectation or your experience or what you're more accustomed to. When you jump into another difficult game, then that difficult game has to measure up to your previous experience, right? That actually happened to me because I started with Monster Hunter World and then I went into Elden Ring. I didn't start using the lock-on camera until my second playthrough, and I hadn't finished my first playthrough, and this was when I reached like Shadow of the Erdtree around there. And the reason why I wasn't using the camera lock-on was because I wasn't using it in Monster Hunter World. So my experience with Monster Hunter World definitely affected how I approached Elden Ring, how I felt about it. The more I played it, the better I felt about it. Now I like both games. I understand that one and the other have things that are superior to the other, however, and I might do a video on that eventually. So what did Silksong do to go against the grain? Number one, I'm gonna say that it ganked us. I would say that Elden Ring, from studying how Miyazaki exactly went on about applying difficulty in that game, it seems like they didn't really rely on multiple enemy encounters quite a bit. And most of the time that I did get into multiple enemy encounters, I had the option to retreat and re-engage depending on when things were better, when I had a better chance of winning. And this was without using, you know, summons and magic, which makes it a little bit more difficult to deal with multiple enemies. In Silksong, that wasn't the case. And before I get into that further, actually, I'm going to mention that I think that the reason why FromSoft doesn't get too much into multiple enemy encounters is because they build pretty much every single one of the enemies that they have in the game in a way that will have them give you trouble one-on-one. These enemies are built to keep up with you one-on-one, to punish you one-on-one if you're taking a flask or if you're doing whatever. They are built to cause problems. So when you put two of them together against you, that cup overfills pretty much instantly. I'm guessing that that's probably the reason why it's very rare that you get locked in a room with multiple enemies in Elden Ring. I can only remember one instance. Before I get into that, I'm going to mention that even in Monster Hunter World, for example, if you are having to deal with multiple monsters at the same time, because these monsters are tuned to deal with you one-on-one, you have the option to dung pod them, to separate them so that you only have one to deal with. I don't know if these devs are just understanding of that. I mean, evidence would seem to suggest that that is the case. They know that 2 versus 1 is just too much. I mean, the moveset that they craft for the player character is limited. You have to commit to your attacks, you have to commit to your dodges, you have to commit to your healing, and those enemies that they build are built to punish you for doing any of these things. So when you have more than one of them on you at the same time, then you are at a very fast disadvantage. And Silksong did not care. It looks to me like they're completely aware of the fact that that cup fills up very quick. I'd like to mention there's a room in Elden Ring, I remember, in the castle, the one where you fight Godric, where you get locked in the room. Someone closes the door behind you and giggles, and then the lights shut off, and then when the light comes back on, you're faced with a banished knight. So the banished knights were tough, so some people probably had a difficult time with that thing, but that's all there's in there. Had that been Silksong, when the lights came on, you would have seen one banished knight in your face, one banished knight off in the corner beginning to approach you, maybe 2 low-level enemies harassing you with like small knives, and maybe 1 or 2 Molotov cocktail flinging lower-level enemies approaching you or just throwing stuff at you from a distance, or up high on a platform where you can't even get to them, or they could fly. One of those, you know, and the door would have been locked. That's pretty much Silksong. And I think that's one of the things that definitely created the friction between Silksong and a lot of the players who had their standards set by both Souls-likes in the past and the current Elden Ring. That isn't to say that Silksong just decided to throw multiple enemies at us. It seems to me like they were aware of the fact as well, just like FromSoft and Capcom, that putting multiple enemies together in the same room fills that cup very quick. Hunter's March seems to have really hammered home the idea that the big, I guess, strat to get through it was by getting rid of the squishiest enemy as soon as possible. Every time they put you together with another enemy in that section, there was one enemy that was squishier. And then later on, when they finally put you against an enemy or 2 enemies that had high health pools together, these enemies were easier to deal with in one-on-one situations. I would mention Cygnus and Gron at this point. When I hit Cygnus and Gron the first time, I thought that Team Cherry had lost it. I thought they were out of their minds. I thought that it was quite possible that they had just done that for difficulty's sake. Sometimes I do feel that some of the things they did were for difficulty's sake, but maybe I'll make a video about that in the future. But in the case of Cygnus and Gron, when you deal with either of them alone, they weren't that much more difficult than an advanced field enemy. I would say that they were both pretty easy alone. So once you got rid of one of them, the fight became a lot easier. Secondly, dealing with them together wasn't as bad as some of the things I encountered in Hunter's March, for example. I would say that one of the most difficult multiple enemy encounters is the Scar Guard together with the Spear Scar. Those two were difficult. Maybe another enemy that used multiple enemies in the same fight was the Savage Beastfly. I know that one is going down in infamy. I do still feel like it's a little much. Honestly, I felt like it was too much because of other reasons, but I'll probably get into that in another video. But Team Cherry knew what they were doing when they did it, when they decided to throw multiple enemies at us, and they balanced it so that we could get through it. Another thing that I think that it did that created a lot of friction was that it put healing behind a skill wall. So even in Dark Souls, right, you have however many flasks you're given, and you can take them immediately. Sure, you can get hit out of them and whatnot, but if you get hit out of them, it doesn't mean that you can't attempt again most of the time unless you're down to 0, but it takes time to get there. Silksong doesn't care. Silksong, if you have enough thread to heal and some left over to almost be able to heal again, if you get hit while you're healing, you lose the entire spool. All of it is gone. They were not playing around when they came up with the punish mechanics for getting hit while healing. They also removed the ability to heal 1 mask at a time, depending on what situation worked best for you in the original Hollow Knight. So if you committed to healing, you were locked in. If you didn't plan it correctly, if you hadn't been studying the boss long enough to know when your openings were, then you were going to pay the price, and it was a very steep price. And it definitely affected how Silksong has been received overall. Another one that I'm going to mention is that it dabbled in a taboo, specifically popularized and later demonized by the Dark Souls community itself, which is runbacks. It used runbacks. Personally, I don't have a problem with how Silksong used its runbacks because the most difficult runbacks or the most ludicrous runbacks, I would say, are probably the one in Bile Water is number one. And maybe the second worst one for me was the one in the Sands of Carrick, where you had to get all the way back to the Raging Conchfly. And that was because I wasn't using the nearby bench and the elevator shortcut. But at the same time, in both of these situations, Team Cherry placed hidden silk rooms along the path that would help me reach the boss at the end of the run back at or close to full HP, which I think is pretty much the most important thing. When we get hit with a run back, the thing that we're most dreading at that moment is reaching the boss not at full health, because these bosses are rough. If we get there on low health, it's aggravating for a lot of people. It's not fun. I mean, the Dark Souls community has spoken on this. So if Silksong is releasing into a gaming industry largely shaped by Dark Souls and the Dark Souls community and the issues and the things that they like, it only makes sense that Silksong was gonna hit some friction there. And that, I think, is the reason why Silksong hasn't been received as well. I'm not saying that Silksong is getting, review bombed. It's not getting, reviews are largely positive. I mean, my review is a 9 out of 10 masterpiece. Other people are just saying that it's good, but I don't hear anybody singing its praises like I would like them to be honest. So that being said, then what's the point of this video, right? Well, it's to complain. I'm pointing the finger at Souls veterans and streamers, and I'm accusing them of not loving Silksong as much as it deserves. I'm not lying. But admittedly, this is all while hoping to bring awareness to the concept. If you're a Souls veteran, whether from the original Dark Souls or from Elden Ring, or from other Souls-likes such as Lies of P or Black Myth Wukong, you might dislike Silksong because it deliberately decided to be different from what you're accustomed to. And that's something that it had to do. Otherwise, it'd just be another game with punishing difficulty mechanics that played it safe, right? And we need more developers like that. Developers like that are the ones that change the industry. Alright, so that's gonna do it for today's video. If you liked, please remember to like or subscribe. If you didn't like, don't be a coward. Hit up the comments. Tell me why you didn't like the video. I appreciate the constructive criticism. I learn a lot from criticism in general. I hope you enjoyed as much as I enjoyed. See you on the next one.